Mom, stop watching. Today is Aunt Grace's 70th birthday celebration. Dad isn't coming back. You should go to bed early. Okay? Lisa and I need to head over too. Big brother and third sister are already there. I'm leaving as well. My youngest son's voice carried a trace of impatience as he pulled his wife toward the door. I struggled to sit up, reaching out weakly to stop him. But the door shut firmly. The last thing I saw was his annoyed expression. And the last thing I heard was his voice fading into the distance. So irritating. Every time Aunt Grace wants us to spend time with Mom, she has to create some kind of scene. And now she's pretending to be seriously ill. Only I'm dumb enough to fall for it. None of my siblings came back. They must have already seen through her tricks. His wife tried to calm him down. Stop it. Let's go quickly. I heard Aunt Grace's son bought a villa and plans to move Dad there. I want to see what the villa looks like. I closed my eyes weakly, tears streaming uncontrollably down my face. My body felt like it was burning, as though I really was about to die. Memories of my pitiful life flashed through my mind. Nathan and I weren't introduced by a matchmaker. He was a platoon leader, and I was a performer in the cultural troupe. He was quiet and serious, with an air of integrity. That's why I married him. And it marked the beginning of a life filled with sorrow. He was too upright. Every month, most of his $110 subsidy was used to help the poor soldiers under his command. I tried to persuade him to save some for us, but he accused me of not caring about his subordinates. Later, I convinced myself that such a caring man must have good qualities. I silently accepted his actions. But when I became pregnant and could no longer perform, leaving me with only a basic salary, life became difficult. During holidays, when someone complained to him about their struggles, he would hand over our rice or flour, often coming home empty-handed. Each time, I waited eagerly, only to be disappointed. I also wanted to celebrate the new year properly. We began to argue. He thought I was being unreasonable. After I gave birth to our eldest son, I started asking for his salary every month. He thought I had changed and looked at me with disdain. But when I saw our skinny little boy crying from hunger, I had no choice but to fight for it. Perhaps there wasn't much love between us to begin with. Our marriage became an empty shell. He stopped coming home, choosing to stay at the barracks instead. My mother-in-law had to step in and force him to return. Eventually, we had more children, and perhaps he realized how hard raising kids could be. He started leaving half of his salary for us each month. I was content with that. Life finally seemed to stabilize, but fate had other plans. The platoon leader who accompanied him on a mission never came back. Nathan took on the responsibility of caring for his family, often spending entire days helping them. Gwen, a widow with 2 children, had lost her pillar of support. I felt sorry for her, but my sympathy ended the day Nathan brought them home. With military housing in short supply, Gwen was about to be sent back to her hometown. Nathan sat silently on the bed all night, unable to accept it. I tried to comfort him, saying he'd done everything he could, but I never imagined he would make such an outrageous decision. Without consulting anyone, Nathan brought Gwen and her children to our house. Seeing them standing in our cramped 2-bedroom home, I lost it. I fought with him like a madwoman. How can we possibly fit 6 people in this tiny house? Where are they supposed to stay? That was the first time Nathan hit me. His eyes were bloodshot as he slapped me hard across the face. He glared at me, then turned and walked out with Gwen. He carried her luggage and had 1 child on each shoulder. Gwen followed him, sobbing with every step. They looked more like a family than we ever did. He never once helped me carry even a single onion, nor had he ever carried our children on his shoulders. But outside, he had built another home, his and Gwen's home. Every month, he only gave me 1/3 of his salary. The rest went to Gwen and her family. For the sake of my children, I endured it. As he climbed the ranks smoothly, people began to assume Gwen was his wife. I was forgotten by everyone. Even my children grew closer to Gwen because she made them new clothes and bought them snacks. They didn't know how much effort it took just to keep them alive. No one knew that I was so hungry every day I survived on nothing but cold water. No one saw me arguing with the cafeteria manager, just to get 1 extra steamed bun for my kids to eat. Every time this happened, Gwen would step in, dressed immaculately, and smooth things over on my behalf. Everyone praised her for being so gracious. I on the other hand, was like a rat living in the gutter. But they all forgot that the clean clothes on her back and the money in her hand should have been mine. Even the man standing impatiently by her side, glaring at me, should have been mine. Before I married Nathan, I had been the star performer of the cultural troupe, a well-educated and elegant woman. But everyone now gravitated toward Gwen. When Nathan was reassigned to a new position elsewhere, he took Gwen and her family with him. I didn't even know they had left until a month later. By then, I could no longer cry. There wasn't any time for tears. The kids needed food. They needed schooling. And I needed to stay alive. I struggled for years, taking care of Nathan's parents and raising the children. By the time I saw them again, the kids were grown, and Nathan and Gwen returned, looking like an ill-matched pair. To everyone else, though, Gwen was now Mrs. Colonel. I stood quietly in the crowd, unnoticed. Nathan glanced at me briefly but didn't recognize me. Gwen did. Her face showed a hint of awkwardness, and she tried to pull her hand away from Nathan's arm, but he held on to her firmly. Her face turned red as she looked at me with an expression full of apology. Everyone around them praised their decade-long love story. I slipped away silently. Perhaps it was better this way, as though we had never known each other. The children were mine alone now. Or so I thought. When my children heard that Nathan had returned, they all ran to find him. Seeing their shabby clothes, Nathan scolded me viciously, accusing me of being so stingy that I wouldn't spend a penny on them. He blamed me for the hard life his children had endured. Then Nathan took all the children away. I cried and begged him not to take them. But Gwen stepped in, shielding the children, and said I was scaring them. I knelt before her, pleading with her not to take my children. Nathan pushed me aside roughly, dusting off Gwen's skirt as he said coldly, "Don't get close to her. She's filthy. You're not her match." Gwen frowned. "Nathan, don't. This is my fault. I've taken so much from her over the years. I know how much pain she's endured." Nathan looked serious. "You've never taken anything from me, Gwen. You've always urged me to come back. But I was the one who didn't want to. It's not your fault. Don't feel guilty. From now on, I'll make it up to the kids." Gwen tried to say something else, but Nathan held her hand and led her away. My children followed them without hesitation, leaving me alone in the broken home. They left without a trace of regret. Even now, as I lie on the brink of death, they think I'm just wasting their time. How laughable. My body feels weaker by the second. Perhaps I really am dying. Maybe that's for the best. This world is too bitter. I don't want to come back here again. I sank into darkness. When I opened my eyes again, there was a loud knock at the door. "Lillian, Lillian, get up. The captain is calling for you." I instinctively let out a faint groan, my body reacting faster than my mind. Slowly, I put on my neatly ironed clothes and opened the door. The man on the other side looked me up and down and asked, "Why aren't you wearing a dress? This is such a rare opportunity." That's when it hit me. Today was the day the captain was taking us to meet the soldiers stationed below. It was at this evening event that I had first met Nathan. The memory of my miserable previous life made my face turn pale. "I'm not going," I said. "I don't feel well." He frowned. "How could you suddenly not feel well? Can you manage?" Perhaps my face was too pale. As he seemed to believe me, I recognized him. My good friend, Joe. He was the only one who had ever warned me not to marry Nathan. Someone like him, Chris had said, is the least suited for a normal life. If you ever fight, everyone will take Nathan's side. His face alone represents righteousness. Back then, I didn't believe him. Now, I did. Chris left, still half doubting me. I leaned against the door and slowly slid to the ground. This time, I absolutely couldn't marry Nathan. As I was lost in thought, the captain came in with a sigh, grabbed my arm, and started pulling me outside. "Lillian, you have to go today. Last time, you claimed to be sick. The whole troop is already there except for you. If you don't go this time, people will start saying you're trying to create class divisions." I knew the captain meant well. In my last life, I had always thought he was overly strict and dismissive of people. But it was him who fought to get me my basic salary, who urged me to stay strong during countless lonely nights. That small income was the only thing keeping me alive. The captain hurriedly walked ahead but paused when he noticed my silence. Seeing my slightly red eyes, he was stunned for a moment. "You're really feeling that bad?" He loosened his grip on my hand, as though about to say something, when a cheerful voice interrupted. "What's going on here?" I turned toward the voice and saw a dark-skinned man approaching. Behind him stood Nathan. At this time, he was still young and fresh-faced, his features rugged, his expression serious. I couldn't stop trembling. It was anger mixed with fear. I wanted nothing more than to strangle him right then and there. My entire wretched life had been ruined by him. Nathan seemed sensitive to others' gazes. He lifted his head and met my eyes, only to feel an inexplicable tightness in his chest. Why did this woman look like she wanted to kill him? The captain quickly stepped in, shielding me from view. He chuckled and said, "It's just for the celebration. Lillian has a high fever and even cried about wanting to tough it out, saying, 'A performer is still a soldier. We can endure hardship.'" The company commander clapped his hands in approval. "What a good comrade. But since her fever is this bad, let's not push it. She should go back and rest." Then he turned to Nathan. "Nathan, take her back." Nathan immediately straightened, responding with a firm, "Yes, sir." His voice was so strong that the captain immediately understood. This must be someone Nathan was interested in. That might not be a bad thing, he thought. Lillian, although picky, was hardworking and had a good heart. If the two of them could truly connect, it might work out well. With that thought, the captain left with the commander, leaving me standing there. Nathan took a step closer, then another, until his shadow enveloped me completely. I stared at the ground, at the dark silhouette looming over me, feeling an inexplicable fear rising in my heart. In my last life, Nathan had arrived much earlier. Why was it different this time? I didn't dare think further. Turning around, I broke into a run. Nathan froze for a moment before quickly following me. The closer his footsteps got, the faster I ran. The uneven path nearly made me trip. "Careful," Nathan called out, reaching out to catch me. Every hair on my body stood on end. Even if I twisted my ankle, I wasn't going to let him touch me. I thought I would fall embarrassingly to the ground. But the next second, someone caught me around the waist. I opened my eyes to see a cocky face smirking at me. "Well, Lillian, this time it seems you're the one throwing yourself into my arms." Behind him, Nathan's brows furrowed. "Comrade, mind your words." I saw with my own eyes that this young lady was about to fall. "What you said is inappropriate and unkind to a respectable woman." Krisho, the man who had caught me, pulled me behind him protectively. "And who do you think you are?" Nathan's expression turned serious as he introduced himself formally. "Nathan Carter, infantry. Now, please release this young lady." I had never heard Nathan say so many words at once, but his stern tone reminded me of something important. Wasting no time, I broke free from Chris's grip, ignoring them both, and limped away. My ankle was injured, making my steps uneven. I didn't want to see Nathan, nor did I want to see Chris. The last time Nathan had brought Gwen and her children to our home, it was Chris who had stood up for me and fought Nathan. Gwen was the widow of a fallen soldier, and Chris, knowing his temper and principles, couldn't stay in the army much longer after that. He retired soon after, and I never heard from him again. When I finally reached the dormitory entrance, a young woman with a ponytail and a basket in her hand walked by. My pupils dilated in shock. It was Gwen. I hadn't realized we had crossed paths this early in life. Gwen glanced at me, curled her lips in disdain, and brushed past, bumping my shoulder as she went. Every few steps, however, someone grabbed her by the collar and dragged her back. "What are you doing? Why are you grabbing me like this?" Gwen protested. Nathan's cold voice replied, "Apologize." Gwen looked up at Nathan's rigid demeanor. He was still a regular soldier at this point, a simple private, but he carried himself with an intimidating presence. "Fine, I'll apologize," Gwen huffed, rolling her eyes before running off. Nathan watched her retreating figure. His brows furrowed tightly. A rude woman like that was exactly the kind of person he despised. I couldn't help but find it ironic. Supporting myself on the handrail, I climbed the stairs step by step, ignoring Nathan's outstretched hand. Once I reached my room, I closed the door behind me without a word. I knew Nathan too well. He had his principles. And if he promised the commander he'd see me to my door, he would do just that. It was laughable. Nathan could keep every promise he made to others, but the one he had made to me, to treat me well, had been completely forgotten. Nathan stood outside the door for a long time, trying to figure out what he had done wrong. Why did this woman seem to hate him so much? What had he done to provoke such hostility? With those thoughts weighing on his mind, he returned to the commander. The commander greeted him with a cheerful grin. That young lady's name is Lillian. She's the star performer of the cultural troupe. I've looked into her. She's a bit picky, but she's hardworking. She'll stay up all night perfecting a dance routine. I think she'd be a good match for you. Nathan couldn't help but recall Lillian's face. Against his better judgment, he didn't object. The commander laughed heartily. I knew it. You've always had high standards. I've introduced you to so many women, and you never gave any of them a second glance. Turns out you prefer pretty girls after all. Nathan immediately looked up, his face serious. His ears turned red. Commander, it's not like that. I just think she's unique. The commander gave him a knowing smile. All right. I get it. The cultural troupe will only be here for a few days. You should spend more time with her. Good women are in high demand. Nathan didn't say whether he would or wouldn't. But the next morning, before dawn, he was already waiting downstairs. He didn't even know why. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of Lillian's gaze would appear, keeping him restless through the night. Frustrated, he decided to wait for her instead. When I woke up, the morning chill hit me, snapping me out of my grogginess. Carrying my wash basin, I headed out, where Chris was already waiting by the door. We walked side by side to the washing area, and he chatted cheerfully about the amusing things that happened the previous day. I wasn't really listening. Instead, I found myself drawn to the happy faces around me. After marrying Nathan in my past life, there were so many people I never saw again. Suddenly, Chris nudged my arm and gestured outside. Turning my head, I saw Nathan standing there. I immediately dropped my gaze. Nathan strode over, carrying a lunchbox. Comrade Lou, this is breakfast I brought for you. I stared at the lunchbox in his hand. In both this life and the previous one, this was the first time Nathan had ever brought me food. In my last life, when I was in the hospital giving birth alone, I had told him I was hungry and worried I wouldn't have the strength for labor. Nathan had brushed it off, telling me to endure. He said everyone was suffering and asked why I had to act so delicate over childbirth. His words made me cry uncontrollably. Annoyed, he left and didn't return until after the baby was born. When he finally showed up, it was only for a quick glance. He said his subordinate's wife was also in labor, and since the subordinate was on a mission, he needed to take care of her instead. I was too thirsty to speak, and my baby, crying from hunger, had a red face from all the screaming. It was someone from the next room who finally took pity on us and brought over some formula for the baby. Meanwhile, Nathan had been up early to queue for formula to deliver to his subordinate's wife. How ironic. Chris noticed I wasn't reacting and kicked me lightly. Startled, I snapped back to reality, looked at Nathan coldly, and said, "Thank you, Comrade Carter, but I'm not hungry." Nathan's hand tightened around the lunchbox, and he looked unsure of what to do. "Comrade Lou, did I offend you somehow?" "No," I replied curtly. "We don't even know each other." Nathan had never encountered such a response before. He had always been kind to others, and this situation was completely new to him. After a pause, he bowed deeply. Startled, I took a few steps back. Nathan straightened up, his expression serious. "I'm sorry, Comrade Lou. I don't know how I might have offended you, but if I did, I sincerely apologize." I wanted nothing more than to sever any connection with him. Shaking my head repeatedly, I said, "No, that's not it. I just don't want to get married right now. I only want to focus on dancing." Nathan pressed his lips together, clearly disappointed. He placed the lunchbox into my basin and walked away briskly. I hurriedly took a few steps after him, but he quickened his pace even more. With a sigh, I gave up. Chris came over, grinning mischievously. "So, when did you two meet? Why didn't I know about this?" I told him everything that had happened the previous day. Neither of us thought much of it at the time. But later that evening, the commander came to see me. His expression stern. "Lillian, how could you let a soldier bow to you? This is a serious matter. You need to write a self-critique about this incident. You also need to formally apologize to Comrade Carter." I was completely dumbfounded. But it was him who. The commander cut me off. "Say nothing more. This matter has caused a negative impression. The company commander personally came to demand an explanation, so it must be addressed." Biting my lip, I realized once again that any involvement with Nathan brought nothing but trouble. Chris grinned and wrapped his arm around the commander's shoulder. "Commander, don't be so serious. This isn't Lillian's fault. Nathan showed up early in the morning, bringing breakfast and bowing like that. It startled even me." The commander's anger softened a bit, but he didn't relent. I took the written self-critique and followed him to the unit. Soldiers were training diligently along the road as we walked. The commander knocked on the office door and led me inside. The moment I stepped in, my eyes landed on Nathan. The commander gave me a look, and I understood. Taking a deep breath, I approached Nathan, lowered my head, and bowed deeply. "I'm sorry, Comrade Carter." Nathan immediately shook his head and tried to help me up, but I stepped back to avoid his hand. Straightening up, I began reading my written apology aloud. When I finished, I took out a food ration coupon and handed it to Nathan along with the lunchbox. "Comrade Carter, I didn't know where to return your lunchbox, so I failed to give it back in time. That was my mistake. The food inside was shared with others, which was wrong of me. Here is your ration coupon. I don't know why you bowed and apologized to me, but I'm returning the gesture twice over to express my regret. I truly apologize." Nathan scratched his head, clearly flustered. The commander cleared his throat, prompting me to step back and stand quietly behind him. The commander spoke earnestly to the company commander. "Lillian is straightforward and focused solely on her dancing. If there's been any misunderstanding, it's better to clear it up now." The company commander's expression stiffened. His original intent had been to subtly match the two of us, thinking that once we became a family, any misunderstandings would naturally resolve. Nathan looked at me seriously, his tone tinged with disappointment. "Is that how you see it too, Comrade Lou?" I nodded firmly. "I only want to dance." Nathan's eyes dimmed instantly. When we left the office building, the commander glanced at me and sighed. "Lillian, if you have no interest in Nathan, you should find someone like-minded and settle down quickly." The mention of marriage filled me with dread. "Commander, I really don't want to get married." The commander sighed again. "It's not about what you want. Don't underestimate how stubborn those in charge can be. They'll pair you up with someone whether you like it or not. I can see they've already set their sights on you." A chill ran through me, and I felt utterly defeated as I returned to the dormitory. Chris was already waiting for me. "Well, how did it go?" he asked. I collapsed into his arms and began sobbing. Why is my life so miserable? If the company commander insists, even the commander won't have a reason to refuse. For women in the cultural troop, once we reach a certain age, we either get discharged or get married. I'll have to choose one. To everyone else, discharge was considered the worst possible outcome. I spent the entire night thinking, even if it meant giving up dancing, I couldn't bear to repeat the hardships of my previous life. So, I submitted my application for discharge. When the commander saw the application, he was stunned. "Is marriage really such a difficult thing? I wasn't forcing you to marry right away." Choking back tears, I replied, "I don't want to trouble you anymore. I can't find the right person, and I don't want to get married." The commander looked at me for a long moment before letting out a heavy sigh. "Then do you have any requests?" "I have only one." My voice was steady. "Commander, I want to perform on stage one last time. In my previous life, I left the stage too abruptly. This time, I want to say a proper goodbye." The commander hesitated briefly before nodding in agreement. That evening, there was already an internal performance scheduled. Feeling excited, I made my way back to prepare. Along the way, I saw a lively group of soldiers congratulating someone. In the center of the crowd was Gwen, dressed in a red outfit with red ribbons tied to her braided pigtails. Standing beside her, smiling shyly, was her husband. The same platoon leader who had tragically passed away around this time in my previous life. Now, he was already a platoon leader, as indicated by the insignias on his shoulders. No wonder Gwen had sneered and called Nathan a lowly grunt that day. At this moment, Gwen was smiling sweetly, handing out rock candy to everyone. When she got to me, she let out a cold huff. Her husband nodded at me apologetically, clearly uneasy. Gwen's eyes were filled with hostility as she clung to her husband's arm, whining, "I've been walking all day, and my feet are so sore. Hold me, will you?" Her husband's ears turned red as he obliged, supporting her as they walked away. Gwen glanced back at me with a smug, triumphant smile. In that instant, something clicked for me. Maybe, in my past life, Gwen didn't love Nathan at all. She simply figured out how to exploit his principles to her advantage, securing countless benefits, a comfortable life, and a happy family. While my children grew up ordinary and unremarkable, Gwen's 2 sons eventually became high-ranking officers in the military district. Understanding this, I didn't know whether to feel sorry for Nathan or to laugh at myself. I pushed the thought aside and focused entirely on my performance that evening. I poured every ounce of understanding from both this life and the last into my final dance. With each step, I conveyed the desolation and absurdity of my life, the bitter humor and sorrow of it all. As I collapsed to the ground like a dying swan, I truly believed I had perished in that moment. But the thunderous applause that filled the air pulled me back to reality, wiping the tears from the corners of my eyes. I stood up. The audience was packed with people, company commanders, battalion commanders, platoon leaders, and countless soldiers. Their gazes were intense, their words direct. "Comrade Lou, when you fell to the ground, I wanted to grab a gun and shoot anyone who had ever hurt you," one soldier said, his voice raw with emotion. Chris clapped so hard his hands turned red. The commander, his eyes red with tears, came forward and hugged me tightly. Nathan was among the crowd as well, and even his eyes glistened with moisture. When I fell during the performance, Nathan had felt a wave of indescribable sadness that made him want to lash out at anyone who had caused me pain. To him, I was someone so wonderful, someone he wanted to protect and cherish, to never let shed another tear. Resolving himself, Nathan stepped forward, but Chris beat him to it. Chris removed his military badge, handing it to me with a rare solemnity that replaced his usual carefree demeanor. "Comrade Lou," he began, "I like you very much. I hope I can have the opportunity to pursue you with marriage in mind. I swear on my badge that at home, your word will be my command. I will follow your every order. As long as I'm not on duty, all my time will be yours." Nathan's gaze darkened, and he stared at me intently. Chris's sudden confession left me flustered, and without thinking, I blurted out, I don't want to have children. Children are nothing but trouble." My words made everyone present frown. A woman who doesn't want children? What kind of woman is that? What's the point of marrying her? Even the commander tugged at my sleeve, showing his disapproval. Chris was momentarily stunned but quickly composed himself. "That's a serious question, Lillian. I'll need to think about it carefully. Can you give me a day?" I didn't expect him to respond this way, so I nodded. After all, it would take a few days to process my discharge paperwork anyway. The crowd dispersed, and Nathan tried to approach me, but the commander subtly blocked his path. The commander was visibly frustrated. "Lillian, such a promising talent, leaving over something like this. It's infuriating. But what can I do? The company commander's backing is too strong." Chris turned to Nathan with a sneer. "You're Nathan, aren't you? Satisfied now? Meeting you has been the unluckiest thing to ever happen to Lillian. If she doesn't want to deal with you, she has to quit and go home. Sure, we're just performers, not heroes willing to spill blood and sacrifice ourselves like you soldiers. But we're human too. Do you have any idea how much Lillian has suffered? She was sold off by her parents, beaten within an inch of her life, and only managed to find a bit of peace when she joined the cultural troupe. Why do you have to make things so hard for her?" Chris's voice trembled as tears streamed down his face. I felt like a bystander to my own story, detached from the painful memories Chris brought up. I had long since buried those moments. Looking back now, I realized that in my past life, The reason I married Nathan was simply because I wanted a home of my own. I was like an unwanted stray, with no one who cared enough to stay by my side. I thought marriage would bring me protection, but it had all been an illusion. Back in the dormitory, I began packing up things I didn't need anymore and shared them with my fellow performers. We hugged each other tightly, tears brimming in everyone's eyes. Suddenly, the door burst open. Nathan stood there, his breathing uneven. He grabbed my arm and started pulling me outside. I shook him off after several tries. "Comrade Carter, what do you think you're doing?" Nathan's gaze was serious as he looked at me. "I'll marry you. Don't leave." I stared at him warily. Nathan let out a helpless laugh. "I'm not a bad person, Lillian. Please don't treat me like I'm your enemy. I like you. From the moment I first saw you, I liked you. I don't know why things turned out like this, but I swear I never wanted to force you to leave. Maybe I used the wrong approach. I thought you were like me, someone who followed orders from the organization. How do you divide your monthly salary?" I interrupted him abruptly. Nathan seemed taken aback but answered honestly. "As a platoon leader, I get $115 per month, including allowances. Some of the soldiers in my unit have families in extreme difficulty. I give $20 to each of the 3 families. That leaves $15, which I'd give to you." I covered my face, unable to suppress a bitter smile. "But I want the best face cream, the most fashionable clothes, a new outfit every month. I also need to eat meat regularly. Your $15 wouldn't even cover that." Nathan's expression grew even more serious. "Face cream? You can use barrier cream. It's only 2 cents each. Clothes? If they're not worn out, they can be mended and reused. Meat? Once a month is doable." I suddenly burst out laughing. Nathan looked at me, bewildered. It took me a while to calm down and meet his gaze again. "I'm not marrying you. Everything I want, I can already have. Even if I leave the troop, the severance pay will be enough for me to live comfortably for a year or 2. But if I marry you, I'll have none of that. Instead, I'll have to cook, clean, and do your laundry. And I'll have to take care of you, cook for you, and have your children. Nathan, tell me, what do I get out of marrying you?" Nathan looked stunned for a moment, lost for words. "You'd marry me to live a stable life. Of course. Isn't that what marriage is about? A husband provides food and clothing." I laughed bitterly. "Marrying you wouldn't leave me starving. Sure, but I wouldn't live happily, either. I'm not stupid. Why would I marry you?" With that, I turned and walked away. Nathan stood there, frozen in place. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. Every time he gave his money to soldiers in need, they would thank him profusely, saying that whoever married him would be the luckiest woman alive. The next day, Chris didn't come looking for me, which didn't surprise me. After all, who would want a wife who didn't want children? On the 3rd day, the company commander summoned me privately. His words were veiled, but his meaning was clear. I had led Nathan astray. Over the past 2 days, Nathan had been distracted during training. His shooting accuracy, which was always perfect, had suddenly declined. I wanted to scream, to flip the table in anger, but I couldn't. Instead, I smiled and accepted the criticism. And so, once again, I stood in front of everyone and read my self-critique. Bowing deeply to Nathan, I said, "I'm sorry, Comrade Carter. I've already submitted my discharge application. I truly have no way to connect with you. I apologize." The company commander's face turned completely dark. He suggested I have a private conversation with Nathan. Why should I meet with him privately? Words can destroy a reputation. If anyone saw us and rumors started spreading, even jumping into the Yellow River wouldn't clear my name. I'd have no choice but to marry Nathan. In my past life, I might have fallen for it, but not this time. I didn't want to stand next to Nathan for even a second longer. This time, very few people sided with Nathan. Anyone with eyes could see that the fault wasn't mine. After all, I was already being forced to leave. Nathan stood there, dazed, as I walked away without looking back. On the 5th day, my discharge paperwork reached its final stage. The commander urged me to reconsider, but I shook my head firmly. With a resigned sigh, he stamped the documents and handed them to me. Take this to the logistics office. Once you're registered, you can leave anytime. I sincerely thanked the commander, not just for his help in this life, but also for the support he had given me in my past life. Just as I was about to leave, I heard a voice behind me. Wait. Chris stumbled into the room, clutching his backside, his steps uneven. With a loud thud, he dropped to his knees in front of me. Startled, I quickly stepped back. Chris grabbed my hand, refusing to let go. Lillian, you heartless woman. I nearly got beaten to death because of you. And now you're leaving. I saw the cold sweat dripping from his temples and couldn't bring myself to pull away. What happened to you? Ignoring my question, Chris countered with one of his own. Did you mean it when you said you'd marry someone without having kids? It's true. I replied cautiously. But I didn't say I'd marry you. I only meant. Chris shook his head vehemently. I don't care. My parents have already accepted that they won't have grandchildren. You have to marry me now. The commander rushed over in a few quick strides. Is this for real? Chris gritted his teeth. I'm still injured. If I hadn't heard that this heartless woman was planning to run away, I'd still be lying in bed for another 3 days. The commander's face lit up with delight. He grabbed my discharge application and tore it into shreds. All right. I approve of this marriage. Chris, write up your application immediately. Nathan offered to help submit my paperwork for the marriage approval. Chris, trembling slightly, pulled a pre-filled application form from his pocket. His details were already neatly written out, leaving only my information to complete it. The commander, thrilled, took the form and nudged me to fill it out. I hesitated, feeling like I was walking straight into a trap. I had no intention of stepping into another pitfall. The commander grinned. This form was filled out 6 months ago. Chris, you've been planning this for a while, haven't you? I glanced down at the date on the form. Sure enough, it had been prepared long ago. Chris, embarrassed, covered his face. What can I say? Love at first sight. But Lillian always said I'm full of sweet talk and prefers men who are quiet and serious. I immediately looked up. I don't like that type anymore. Chris's eyes lit up. Great. Then you can like me instead. Sweet talk is my specialty. I'm number one. The commander burst out laughing. All right, Lillian. No children means you can keep dancing forever. I'd really hate to see you leave. Don't worry. Your position will always be here. You were born to dance. Under the commander's persuasion, I reluctantly agreed. He left with the paperwork, looking delighted. Chris's eyes crinkled in a wide grin. And despite myself, I felt a little better seeing his happiness. You're really this happy? I asked. Chris nodded enthusiastically. Lillian, I like seeing you shine on stage. Even after we're married, I won't make you stop dancing. I'll handle everything at home. If I'm out on a mission, my mom will come and help. Don't worry. She'll leave once she's done. She won't interfere. She's very respectful of boundaries. I couldn't help but laugh. Who talks about their mom like that? Chris shrugged nonchalantly. You'll understand when you meet her. She's very open-minded. But for now, I need your help getting up. I quickly helped him to his feet. He winced dramatically, clutching his backside and groaning. His antics made me laugh so hard my stomach hurt. As I helped Chris out of the compound, a military vehicle was waiting at the gate. Seeing Chris approach, the driver quickly opened the door. Chris held onto my hand tightly, refusing to let go. Why not just come with me to meet my parents today? He said. No time like the present. I looked down at my casual clothes, hesitating. I can't meet them like this. I need to dress properly. Chris ignored my protest and tried to pull me toward the car. Just as I resisted, a shadow darted over, yanking Chris away and grabbing my wrist, pulling me behind him. Chris let out a pained yell, collapsing into the arms of a nearby soldier who rushed to support him. Blood began seeping through Chris's pants. Breaking free from the grip holding me, I ran to Chris. Are you okay? Nathan frowned, pulling me back toward him. I didn't use any force. He's faking it. Nathan, I snapped, shaking his hand off. The commander said I'm getting married. It's already been reported. Nathan's face fell, his expression one of disbelief. How could you be so impulsive? This is a decision that will affect your entire life. I let out a cold laugh. In my previous life, Nathan had married me within 5 days. Wasn't that impulsive? Nathan's gaze grew urgent as he tried to reason with me. I've thought it through. You were right. I shouldn't prioritize other families over my own. From now on, my entire stipend will go to you. Marry me, and you'll only have to have one child. I don't have any bad habits, and there are no shameful connections in my life. I am innocent. Chris chimed in. I've lived an honest life too. Who here isn't clean and decent? We all are. Nathan, clearly displeased, glared at Chris. I'm speaking to Lillian. Chris tugged at my sleeve. You promised me. You won't go back on your word. Right. His eyes were filled with anxiety. I held his hand firmly and looked at Nathan. If I marry him, I won't leave anything behind for you to hope for. With that, I led Chris into the car, glancing back at Nathan. Nathan, don't approach any other women for now. Nathan's eyes lit up, but I smiled faintly. Even if you do meet someone, it will only be a fated tragedy. Next year, you'll find the one who truly suits you. As the car drove away, Chris leaned closer to me. You know how to predict destinies too? I smiled softly and shook my head. I asked the driver to stop at a grocery store, bought a few things, and then allowed the car to continue. We eventually arrived at a military district compound, filled with elegant 3-story Western-style houses. Only those with high positions could live here. Lower ranks didn't qualify. Following Chris, I walked inside. A woman wearing a blue padded jacket, carrying a basket, came out and called loudly into the house. Ma'am, the young master has returned. Chris frowned. Didn't I tell you not to call me that? The woman slapped her mouth lightly. Right. Not young master. It's Madame Jo bringing someone home. Chris rolled his eyes in exasperation while I pressed my lips together, stifling a laugh. A moment later, a woman in a dark navy dress embroidered with Solomon's seals came out. It was Chris's mother. Nervously, I nodded in greeting. She gave me a once-over, inspecting me from head to toe. You're quite pretty. I can't believe you'd take a liking to someone like Chris. Your tastes are interesting. Mom, Chris called out, exasperated. His mother patted her chest in mock shock. Why are you shouting? You nearly gave me a heart attack. Hurry inside. I want to have a chat with my future daughter-in-law. Once inside, I placed the things I had bought on the table and pulled out a teal silk scarf with gold trim. Twisting it delicately, I fashioned it into a rose before draping it around her neck. Her eyes lit up instantly as she rushed to grab a mirror, admiring the scarf from every angle. She then took me upstairs to help her pick out outfits that matched. In my past life, I had bought the exact same scarf for Nathan's mother, but she scolded me for wasting money and warned me against buying such useless things. Once we started a family, Chris's mother, on the other hand, was completely different. She asked me how I made the rose shape with the scarf and insisted I teach her. The Jo family was far easier to get along with than I had expected. Their words were logical and thoughtful, and they never once mentioned the issue of not having children. After lunch, Chris's mother washed dishes alongside Aunt Jean, refusing to let me lift a finger. Later, she sliced fruit and brewed floral tea for me. This brought back memories of my first visit to Nathan's home in my past life. His mother had immediately demanded to see my cooking skills, tying an apron around me and sending me into the kitchen to prepare a meal. After I finished cooking, I wasn't allowed to join them at the table. Women should eat in the kitchen, she had said. That day, I sat alone in the kitchen, eating cold food while Nathan's family ate in the dining room. They occasionally shouted at me, demanding I bring more dishes or clean up after them. By the time I finished serving everyone and returned to the kitchen, the food had gone completely cold. When the meal was over, they all waited for me to clear the table and do the dishes. Nathan's mother criticized my cleaning, saying the plates weren't spotless enough. By the time I was done, everyone had gone to bed. Feeling my way through the dark house, I nearly tripped over something. Nathan's mother had prohibited me from lighting a candle, saying it was wasteful and that I was being too pampered. I stumbled back to bed, my body aching. Nathan was already fast asleep. That was the first time I felt disappointed in him. Later, I consoled myself, thinking, this is just how life is for everyone. But now I wonder, if I had been braver back then and left immediately, Would I have avoided the sadness that followed? Chris's mother patted my shoulder, snapping me out of my thoughts. The floral tea she had brewed for me seemed endless, and we talked until we lost track of time. As evening approached, I mentioned that I needed to leave. Chris's mother insisted on having a personal guard escort me home, and reminded me not to go out the next day because she planned to visit me. I nodded obediently. Chris's mother watched me leave with a satisfied smile. However, my good mood vanished the moment I saw Nathan standing nearby. I couldn't understand why he seemed to have nothing else to do. In my past life, even when we got married, he barely had time to attend the ceremony, constantly making excuses about helping a friend or aiding someone in need. Nathan stood there straight as a steel rod, like a soldier on duty. "Comrade Lou," he called out. I ignored him, lowering my head and continuing forward. Nathan stepped in front of me, blocking my path. His voice was cold and hard, sending a shiver down my spine. "Look at me," he said. Reluctantly, I raised my head. Nathan's eyes were filled with pain. "Comrade Lou," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I've been named Model Soldier every year. My reputation among the proletariat is spotless. Why can't you consider me?" I had never seen Nathan with such an expression before. Anguished and humiliated, I couldn't help but laugh. "Nathan, you're truly disgusting." His face stiffened, turning pale with embarrassment. Ignoring his reaction, I continued. "You knew all along that I had submitted my discharge application, didn't you? But you said nothing. It wasn't until I mentioned marriage that you reacted so strongly. Admit it. You're nothing but a selfish, narrow-minded person. You see my leaving the army as a punishment for not marrying you. Marrying someone else goes against your wishes, so you keep pestering me. Nathan, you're the type of person who only craves obedience from others. You want a wife who stands out, a reputation that shines, and the moral high ground at all times. You want it all. But Nathan, you're the one who's truly calculating and manipulative." Nathan's expression darkened completely, his face unreadable. I pushed past him without looking back. I didn't know when he finally left, nor did I care. The next morning, Chris's mother arrived bright and early. With no parents of my own, the commander had taken on the role of my guardian. Chris's mother brought a generous dowry of $580, an unprecedented amount. In the military, weddings were quick and straightforward. Once the report was filed, we were officially married. Chris and I got our marriage certificate and hosted a banquet. When we reached the table where the company commander Saturday, he praised our union as a perfect match. Chris's parents nodded in satisfaction. Meanwhile, Nathan sat stiffly at the same table, his face pale, his lips unable to form even the slightest smile. His eyes brimmed with sorrow. After the guests left, Chris and I went upstairs. Every item in the room was clearly arranged with care. Chris pulled back the blanket, revealing the bed sprinkled with decorative items. I picked up a basin, intending to clean up. These items were expensive, and I wanted to store them properly. Chris stopped me. "Sit down and rest. I'll take care of it." He carefully gathered everything, tidied the blanket, and rearranged the bed with practiced ease. Watching him work so skillfully, I couldn't help but recall my wedding night in my past life. Nathan had come home drunk, vomiting all over the floor. I spent the night cleaning up after him, scrubbing the floor and washing him up. By the time I finished, it was already the middle of the night. I dragged my exhausted body to bed. In my previous life, Nathan pressed down on me without a care, completely ignoring what was beneath me. Nathan's mother, always eager to save money, had filled the mattress with small stones to make it look more presentable. The thick comforter gifted to me by the cultural troupe had been taken away, leaving only a thin blanket. That night, I was cold, uncomfortable, and in pain, crying multiple times. Afterward, Nathan rolled over and fell asleep without a word. I got out of bed, my legs trembling, and went to wash up. By the time I finished cleaning, the first rays of dawn were breaking through the sky. Nathan's mother banged on the door, demanding breakfast made by my own hands. Thinking about those mornings and looking now at Chris, freshly cleaned and still dripping water from his hair, I couldn't help but sigh. You really can't compare one person to another. Chris handed me a set of new clothes, still folded neatly. a luxurious set of sleepwear only available in high-end stores and purchased with foreign exchange coupons. I took it hesitantly. "You prepared this?" Chris's face turned red, a rare sight compared to his usual carefree demeanor. "I thought you'd like it." "I do," I said sincerely. After washing up, I turned off the lights. It has to happen sooner or later. Might as well get it over with so I can sleep a little longer. But unlike my past life, this time was completely different. Chris was gentle and considerate, stopping to ask each time I showed even a slight discomfort. Eventually, I had to silence him myself. I didn't even know when I fell asleep. But when I woke up, everything felt clean and fresh. Chris was already gone, and next to the pillow was a brand new outfit. I quickly got dressed and went downstairs. As a new bride, it was tradition to make the first breakfast. However, as soon as I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw Chris's mother chatting with an elegant older woman. When they noticed me, Chris's mother waved me over. "Lillian, you're awake. Breakfast is still hot." She pulled me to sit on the sofa. When I got a good look at the woman's face, I froze. In my past life, I had met her once when I was doing odd jobs to make ends meet. On my way home, I had found her lying unconscious in the snow, likely from low blood sugar. I carried her back to my house, and when she woke up, she asked me about my name, my address, and who my husband was. At the time, I had only managed to say Nathan before rushing off to cook. Not long after that, Nathan had been promoted. The woman smiled warmly at me. "Do you know me?" I quickly shook my head. Chris's mother, worried I might be hungry, insisted I eat before heading out. Then she and the woman took me to watch my performance. Standing on stage, I didn't care about anyone watching. I was confident, knowing I was the brightest star in the room. A year passed in the blink of an eye. My life was so fulfilling and happy that I rarely thought about my previous life. One day, Chris came home and said he needed to make a donation. He asked me for some money. That's when I learned that Gwen's husband had died. All platoon leaders and above were required to donate. So I handed him 2 large bills. Chris frowned. "That's too much. My rank isn't high. Giving too much will draw attention. 1 bill is enough. Keep the other and use it to buy something you want." I smiled at him. Chris always handed all his money over to me, even asking me to collect his paycheck for him. Chris's mother wholeheartedly approved of this, often giving me money herself or taking me out shopping. When we returned home that evening, Chris held me in his arms and explained what had happened. Gwen's husband had died because of a misjudgment on Nathan's part. Overcome with guilt, Nathan had taken Gwen and her children into his home. Since Nathan still wasn't married, no one objected to him bringing them in. I froze for a moment. In my previous life, Nathan often had sleepless nights. Could this have been the reason? But why didn't he tell me? Gwen stood hesitantly at the doorway. Nathan looked around the dim and quiet house, suddenly struck by a strange feeling that it wasn't supposed to be this way. The house should have been filled with the aroma of food, the sound of children laughing, and even though it might have been crowded, it should have been clean and warm. A gentle woman should have been there, asking about his day and tending to him with care. Somehow, Nathan felt this was how it was meant to be. Gwen tugged at his sleeve, pulling him from his thoughts. Nathan nodded and allowed them to enter. Nathan's actions were soon praised, and word of his generosity quickly reached his mother. In her eyes, Nathan was the most capable man, someone who could even marry the daughter of a commanding officer. How could she allow a widow to hold him back? Nathan's mother packed up her belongings and moved in as well. The household became a chaotic mess, filled with constant arguments. Gwen went around telling everyone how miserable her life was, accusing Nathan's mother of mistreating her and taking advantage of her widow's pension. The chaos left Nathan overwhelmed, unable to face it. He started sleeping at the barracks instead of coming home. What had once been praised as an honorable act now became the subject of mockery. One day, as I was passing by the barracks to visit Chris, I saw Gwen trying to storm out with her 2 children, while Nathan, red-faced, stood in her way. Gone was the calm and composed Gwen from my past life. She pointed at Nathan angrily. "In the morning, I cook for your mother, and she complains it's too hot or that I don't know how to manage a household. At night, I have to fetch her water to wash her feet and clean out the chamber pot. I've never said a word of complaint. I'm already grateful you let us stay here. But we need money to survive. You give your entire paycheck to others, leaving only $15, which your mother controls. Everyone else gets help. But what about me? What about my children? You said you'd take care of us. But this is how you do it. Using my widow's pension to support your whole family. Nathan broke out in a cold sweat. I've never thought of it that way, he retorted. I make over $100 a month. Why would I need you to support us? Gwen let out a mocking laugh. Do you even hear yourself? You give $20 to each of the 5 families of your soldiers in need. That leaves you with $15. And that $15? It's taken by your mother. My son needs money for school. And your mother wants to eat meat. I've been wearing the same clothes for a year. Scared they'll tear. I don't even have fabric for patches. Nathan's face darkened. How can you be so selfish? Don't you have any compassion? With thinking like that, how can you call yourself a soldier's wife? Those same words. He had once said them to me. And back then, Gwen had defended him. Nathan, what Lillian is doing is wrong, she had said. I may not be well educated, but I understand the importance of compassion and mutual aid. A person shouldn't be so selfish. Nathan had looked at Gwen with admiration, as if she were a paragon of virtue, while treating me like a worthless piece of trash. But now, Gwen snapped back at him. Fine, give me the money, and I'll make sure your mother eats meat at every meal. Can compassion fill my stomach? Can it keep my son from starving? Let's survive first before we talk about compassion. Their argument escalated, both pulling at each other's shoulders. Nathan caught sight of me watching from a distance and froze. His expression filled with regret and a tinge of longing. He seemed to be thinking that if he had married me instead, none of this would have happened. With my understanding and willingness to sacrifice, I would have supported and encouraged him. I didn't even bother looking at him again and walked away without a word. The situation quickly spiraled out of control. Eventually, the company commander intervened, deciding that the financial support would end. Gwen and Nathan's mother would each receive half of his remaining $15. However, the families of the soldiers who had been receiving Nathan's aid were furious. For them, $20 was a significant amount, and losing it was unacceptable. They caused such an uproar that higher authorities stepped in, ordering all dependents and soldiers involved to return home. From then on, private financial aid among soldiers was strictly forbidden. This matter completely blocked the path for soldiers who were genuinely in need. Nathan's reputation was thoroughly ruined. He couldn't even lift his head when he went out, and no one spoke to him anymore. His upward trajectory was entirely cut off. By the time Chris received an external transfer, Nathan was still just a low-ranking platoon leader, carrying a small bag. I was about to leave when Chris's mother, concerned, tried to stop me. Lillian, don't go. You've just gotten pregnant. It's still unstable. Chris chimed in. Maybe I shouldn't go either. Let's both stay. I reassured them that I was fine, turning to leave when I saw Nathan standing by the roadside. His posture was as straight as ever. Chris frowned tightly as Nathan approached. Lillian, can I have a word with you? I nodded and walked with him a short distance away. Nathan seemed uneasy. You're pregnant. I nodded again. I want a child who's just like Chris. So, you're doing well. I nodded once more. Nathan took a deep breath. I had a dream. In it, we got married. But because of various misunderstandings, I ended up living with Gwen. Later, you died, and I lost all value to her. By then, Gwen and her children had climbed to the top of the power hierarchy and threw me out. Even our child was dismissed from their job. We lived miserably. Nathan studied my expression carefully. Lillian, you should have married me. Right. He looked visibly disappointed. But somehow, I feel like this isn't how it was supposed to be. I was supposed to be the one climbing higher and higher. I didn't listen to what he was saying anymore. Turning away, I walked back to Chris, who was watching Nathan warily. Chris muttered under his breath. What a lunatic. For the past 2 days, Nathan had been acting strangely, even asking Chris if he knew anything about a red hat next year. I'm not a fortune teller, Chris had replied. How could I know that? A chill ran through me. Nathan wasn't confirming a dream. He was testing to see if I had been reborn too. When I turned back, Nathan was already gone. I let out a deep breath. My life now was good, and I would never repeat the mistakes of my past. In the years that followed, Nathan earned countless commendations on the battlefield, as if trying to redeem himself in a single lifetime. Eventually, he sent Gwen and her children away, but Gwen betrayed him, reporting him to the authorities. Though Nathan had tried to control Gwen, she had overheard too much. On the day Nathan was arrested, Chris was promoted again. I sat in the audience holding our twin sons while Chris's father personally attached his new insignia to his uniform. Our two little boys clapped their hands red, cheering, "Daddy is amazing." I smiled at Chris. I loved him, but I didn't lean on him completely. That, I believed, was the key to the best kind of marriage.